Good evening, and thank you everyone for being here. This is one of a series of sessions which are particularly of interest to people associated with our local groups. And I do hope that you will make contact with whatever is the local group to where you are. So, the title that I've got is Identifying Problems in Learning and Starting to Deal with Them. I had a nice, snappy, shorter version called Getting Started. Um, and I do think that this talk, because it is aimed at parents and I hope some young people as well, is obviously focused on what happens in a school, but, and I think this is very important, the same sort of thinking applies wherever you are, because you don't stop developing learning when you're not in school. And the difficulties that kids have when they're in school are very likely to affect them throughout their lives in one way or another. And sadly, there will be a lot of people who didn't have their needs and difficulties identified and remediated whilst they're in school. So therefore, there's going to be people out there in the workplace and possibly even unable to find work because of difficulties. So the idea of finding out and being systematic in keeping information, I think, is the fundamental point of my talk tonight. There is always support available. It may not be what you want. It may not be easily available. It may cost. It may be not appropriate to you at a particular time, but there is help and support available. And this is where the local associations are useful because they know what's going on in your home area. And of course, you've got the national support as well of the BDA centrally. So the principle on which I'm giving this talk is that understanding what is the problem, what is different about you, is a very powerful thing that can help you. So knowing what, why, and how gives you the chance to change the outcomes. If you don't know these things, it's purely by accident that things happen. So better you know, in my view. Um, and you also have to remember that difficulties will present differently at different times in your life and in different places and with different people. So please don't presume that everything is universally the same. It's not. So I'm going to focus tonight on the role of the parent carer um, and the young person themselves as they get older. Young people is the term now used for people over 16, but not yet adults. But let's carry on with parents as well. And in my many years, I've come across many parents who say there is something wrong. I don't think my child is doing as well as my child ought to be doing. Now, it is possible that they are wrong, but generally, if there's some concern, there's going to be something which is not the same as you'd expect from somebody of that age and in that situation. So I'd use your sensible instincts and look at this and find out what is going on. Once you gather more information, you may change your view. You may realize that this is something which is just a passing phase, a passing difficulty, something which you, almost like a knee-jerk reaction, you deal with it and it's dealt with and it won't be there again. But a lot of these things do persist. And if you don't ask the questions, you won't get the answers. So it's never, ever too soon to start asking questions. If you don't understand something, it is better that you find an answer that helps you understand it. May not be that the person you're asking can give you the answer, but they hopefully will point you towards somebody or something, some information source that will help you. So it's never too early to start finding out. Now, you know, there is a very common presumption that you cannot do things until children get to a certain age. That may be true if you want to be precise in knowing what's going on, but actually the signs of a difficulty will start pretty much from birth. You will find that children who have long-term difficulties may have difficulties early on, say with their speech and their ability to communicate and so on. So it's never too early to find out. Ask the questions, keep asking the questions, but, and this is the most important thing of all, gather all the information that you can together. Make sure the information you gather is accurate, but do it now. Don't leave it, because it will be very difficult to remember what's happened in the past and catch up with it later. So it's much, much better to make some notes now, and possibly make notes that you never need to refer to. Because if you haven't done, it's going to be really, really hard later to be absolutely sure about what happened and when. So if you notice there are some difficulties, as soon as you notice them, you should start thinking carefully. You should keep on asking questions. Start making notes. Now, all the way through this, I will be saying constantly, write it down, get a copy of whatever document has been given you or sent to you or written about you or whatever. Make sure there's a date on it. Make sure you know who wrote it. Make sure that you know the circumstances in which it was written. And when you're talking to people, when you're ringing up the helpline and you're speaking to people and asking them to give you information, try to make notes all the time. Become an inveterate note taker. Record all conversations, record all advice, record all names and addresses and links and everything else. Record it so you know what was said, by whom, and when it was said. So make sure you hold on to letters and emails and reports. Don't throw them in the bin because you didn't understand them. Don't throw them in the bin because you were angry. Just keep hold of them. And I have a suggestion on what you should do to keep them together, which I'll go into quite lengthy detail about in a few minutes. But you must all the time, be very cautious about blowing something up that may not be a big problem. You need the reassurance that you've talked about it with somebody and that this is something that's being dealt with or is not massively serious. But there will be times when you will think there's a problem, which the professionals particularly will say, well, I'm not so sure about that. Please don't be put off by people who say, no, you're imagining things, because you're not. There's obviously a problem that you see. What you need to know is why that problem is there, and you need to know what can be done about it. And that inevitably needs you to know whether it is a significant big problem or whether it's just something that is passing in phase. So schools, or in fact nursery placements, or any other professionally run organization who notices that one of the people there, the children or the young people, has a problem, they then have to tell the parent, carer, and the young person at an appropriate age all about any difficulties and needs which have been noticed. They need to tell them in language they can understand. If you are told something by somebody, do not be afraid of asking them to explain it or to point you to somewhere or someone who can explain it. But they should be telling you what it's all about, why they are concerned. You, as the parent carer, or indeed the young person that's 16 or thereabouts, you should be consulted on any planning and any provision that might be made. If you're not involved, if it's not a co-production, it's less likely to work. So it's good practice for you to know about it, but actually you have a legal right to be told and to know and be involved. So when a meeting takes place, you should really be invited to contribute to all meetings. Of course, sometimes schools will have meetings where they're planning things which involve whole classes or year groups or what have you. That's not an appropriate place perhaps for a parent or a young person to come. But when it's focused on that particular person, individual child, then you should be invited to be there. And whatever you say, whether you say something that they like or dislike, whether they say something they disagree with or agree with, your views, your concerns must be considered. They're very important. Now, this is one where I get on my soapbox an awful lot. Schools have in the past very frequently made decisions, called in external experts to give advice and give help, and make reports and do assessments, etc., and not told the parents. And I am absolutely adamant on that, that should never, ever, ever happen. You know, if somebody from outside of the school has any involvement with your child, you should know in advance all about it. And generally, you should have been involved in speaking with them. Not always easy to do, but it is, in the long run, a far better way of doing things. But, you know, nothing should be done to your child without your knowledge and your agreement. So, our present system in England and pretty much everywhere around the world when special needs are being looked at uses what's called a graduated response. It's where you start off doing simple things, you know, like, for example, you know, giving them a different piece of paper or a different pen, you know, something very low level, sitting them in a different place, lots and lots of different things. And I'm sure you would have loads and loads of ideas about such things yourself. It then gets to the notice of a specialist teacher in a school called the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. Sometimes it has a D in it, Special Educational Needs and Disability Coordinator. But the SENCO will be the person who is supposed to be the expert in the school and will manage the resources that are available to help kids with special needs. And that person will offer advice to the teacher, the class teacher, and they also should be giving advice to you, the parent, and the young person. At another level higher, there are available, sometimes employed by the local authority, sometimes private practitioners who are brought in on a case-by-case basis or a regular support basis for a particular school or group of schools. These specialist practitioners will know more about particular issues like reading, like spelling, like behavior, and they will be asked to come in and give advice. Now, sometimes they will only have to speak with the teachers. Sometimes they will speak to the parents, yourselves. Sometimes they will go into the classroom and just observe, watch what goes on. Sometimes they will actually sit down with the young person or child and actually do things with them and see what they can do to help them using various tools. But again, I'll come back to this one. They should not be doing that without your knowledge. If they're an outside person outside of the school is involved in any way, my view is they should always involve you in it. Much better to know about it and be involved, because then things are told once, much more helpful. So there can also be assessment, advice, and input from local authority services, such as they are, and from NHS specialist services like speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, the school's doctor, the paediatrician, social care sometimes, social workers could actually be helpful. And anything like this, I'll come back to it over and over again, any significant actions like that involve an external agency really must be agreed in advance. So this is a partnership. This is not something that is short term, it's long term. It's something that's done for to meet the needs of the child and to support the school and the parents in the way that they work with the child or the young person. So you have a responsibility as parents and young people. You have a responsibility to say when there's something new going on, when you notice something different, when you have changed concerns. Also, I think you need to remember that you need to say when things go well, because it's very important to give both sides of this, the positives and the negatives. Now, things don't change overnight. There has to be some reasonable time, sometimes to actually find out more, to try things and see what works and find out what can be done, what can't be done, but also sometimes to actually do something, to implement a program of learning and support, and help people to do specific things to try to improve the performance, and the success of their learning. So it's important when that's happening for you as parents and young people to actually be supportive of the practitioners, the teachers, the external support people and advisors. They're human beings. They need to know that what you're doing, what they're doing is all in the same direction, in the interests of the child or young person. And we always do like to be encouraged. We like smiles, we like praise, but we also do need to be told when things are not going right. So I think you've got to be fairly balanced in the way that you do these things. Now, this is the key piece of information that I want you to take away from today. Whatever you do, whenever you talk to somebody, whenever you notice something, make sure you've got an accurate record. Now, an accurate record can include how you felt about it, but it's more important that you get as factually correct a set of information as you possibly can, especially when you're talking with people. Now, if a school is running a meeting, it would be normal that the school would actually produce some kind of record of the meeting, minutes, or a letter of agreement or whatever. And this should set out what was said, who mentioned what, and who is going to do what, and when it's all going to be looked at again, because it's no good doing it and not actually following up and finding out. So there has to be a follow-up and there has to be a review, and hopefully there will be agreed actions that cover everybody's concerns and hopefully will make a difference to the child or young person. Now, this is again, one of my hobby horses. You really do need to be ready and well organized. Now, collect everything. I mean, if there's a piece of paper, be it advice, be it a letter, be it a report, do not let it go. Whatever you do, don't lose it. So you need to have some way of filing it, with all your notes and all the documents, and do it as quickly as you possibly can. I said immediately. I like doing these things during the meetings. I like showing the school and indeed the parents, because since I'm a supporting person, that actually I've kept a record and I know what I'm doing. And my advice is get yourself a big lath, a lever arch file. Yeah, not very many laths of the other kind around, so let's have one of those. And file everything in reverse date order. So the oldest things that you've got about your child should be at the bottom. And you don't take them out of that folder. Well, you take them out to photocopy them and you put them straight back in, but you keep them together. And my advice is do everything in date order. If you find that you have something which you think is very important, then I suggest what you do is you get one of these, which is a piece of sticky back paper and you post-it note, and you take it and you stick it on the page. I'll show you that in a minute in another case. But you can write on this quite easily, saying what it is, letter from so and so, and put a date, and then you can put that out of the side of the folder, and you can find things very quickly. Now, my other suggestion is that you have a ready kit. Now, a ready kit is literally, and here's my example. Let me just get it a little bit further away. It's nothing more than a bag. But in the bag, I've got my big lath. I have some other things in there. I have a ruler. I have this in a plastic bag. I have done it in the past with a pencil case, but actually you can't get as many things in as you might need. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to make myself a bit bigger. Is that possible? No, I've got Nikki there. No, right, so I'm going to have to go back and just do that again. Okay, so in my bag, I have a couple of spare envelopes. I have a couple of pads of post-it notes. I have a few elastic bands just in case. I have a little stapler, a little Bambi stapler with some spare staples. And I have a glue stick. I have a number of other useful things like a paper clip. There's nothing worse than going to a meeting and finding you've just been given a whole host of paper that is not stapled together. By doing this, you can clip them together and you don't lose them. I've got some scissors, which are always very useful. I have a highlighter. In fact, I have a number of highlighters and quite a collection of pens. You can never, ever have too many pens. I would not tolerate any pens which don't work. I'd throw them out straight away. I've got paper clips and I've got various things like that, which I can use. A rubber, there's a pencil in there somewhere, and little device that I got from Wilkinson's, beautiful little device. It is basically a paper punch. So I just do that, click, and I just punch 2 holes in my piece of paper and I can stick it into my folder, which will then hold it together in the right order. So that kind of thing, I think, is very, very important for you to be doing, because that means that you've got things ready for use. And my advice would be put that ready bag. So in your ready kit, you keep it in one of these bags and you have it near to the front door or somewhere you would go on your way out to a meeting, and you keep it in that bag ready to go. If you have 2 children, I'd have 2 ready bags and make sure they're different colors so that you can identify which one's which. So moving on again. So when it comes to meeting up with people again, my suggestion is that you really should be very careful to be realistic about progress, because things don't change immediately. Things take time, and you should have realistic expectations. It is a reality that some people learn faster than other people. So if your child is not one who learns quickly, then you should have an expectation that they will learn better than they have, but not necessarily catch up with everybody right away. You have to take advice on that, and you have to be realistic. You as a parent need to be clear, you need to be assertive, but please, please don't be aggressive. It doesn't help anybody. You might be very frustrated, but you'd be very surprised, I think, to find that the teachers were absolutely uncaring. It would be very, very unusual. They are likely to be as frustrated by the progress or the difficulties as you might be. So please, please be assertive, say what you think, say what you want, say what you expect, but please be polite throughout it all. And you should, of course, receive equivalent politeness and understanding. So going back to this again, openly make notes of discussions and comments. So when you go to a meeting, make sure that before the meeting starts, you've actually laid out on the table where you are sitting your pad of paper, your folder with all the notes in, and whatever bits of stationery you might need during that meeting. So, make sure you're ready before the meeting starts. You don't have to sit next to each other when you have a supporter or note taker present, which is always a very good idea. Having somebody else there who is listening to what's going on, who is not you, is a very powerful thing. But whatever happens, whoever is there, they should also take notes. Do not throw the notes away. It doesn't matter how scrappy they are, keep them as notes and put them in the folder. Right? You can tidy things up and make, pretty report notes if you want, but actually it's what you write at the time that matters most. It's the thing that will jog your memory, will point you in the right direction. Now, attending meetings is a game. Now, I don't like saying that, but you really do need to make sure that you are ready for it, because you as a parent are not as well versed perhaps in having meetings, in going to meetings, as might be somebody like a teacher. If there are papers that you're given on the day, please read them carefully before you make any comments about them. And please don't let people run away with the meeting until you are ready. You should have been given anything like that in advance to give you time to help to read it through and understand it. And this is one of the reasons why having a supporter or a note taker is there, to give you that kind of space, because whilst one of you is talking, the other one can be taking notes. Whilst one of you is talking, the other can be thinking. So very, very sensible to play the game properly, politely, sensibly, by doing these kinds of things. Now, after any meeting, any contact, there should be some kind of outcome. Not always when you meet somebody at the school gate will there be a summary letter, but if it's something important, there should be something that documents what has been said and agreed. If the school or the local authority don't produce something in a reasonable time, write it yourself. Send them a letter or an email saying, I write to record the outcomes of the meeting we had the other day, at such a place in which we discussed this and that, and we agreed that such and such would happen, and we would meet again in X months, etc. Do think very carefully about doing that. Now, if you are stuck, if you get to the situation where nothing is happening or progress isn't being made, you really should at that point stop and think about it, because you can do something. May not be the most instant response, and it may not be the most easy response. So the first thing you should do is look at all the evidence you've got, get your folder out and go through it. And the beauty of doing things in reverse order is you can leaf through from the beginning to the present, and you can get a sense of what's happened and how long it has taken. If you find that there's information missing and you've asked the school and the local authority to provide advice reports and they haven't, then you must think seriously about getting independent reports in. It will cost you. You will need to research, talking to other parents, looking on websites, etc., to find people who are appropriate for doing that kind of work. Not everybody is perfectly good at doing this. Not everyone is properly experienced. You will have to take advice and be cautious about what you do. But what I suggest you do before you go off and talk to other people is write a summary list of everything you know that has got any relevance to it. We noticed this in December of 2020, and by 2021, January, nothing had happened, etc. And if you have a view, you should write that down in your list of the evidence. And then for a child in school, I would go and show that list to the SENCO. And if the SENCO doesn't take notice of it, go and talk to the head teacher. Sometimes in some schools there'll be other layers, but you will go up that level and see what you can find out about who is going to actually take some action to at least make you feel satisfied that they've taken notice of it. And ultimately, when it's a child or a young person under the age of 25, you can ask the local authority, that's the Director of Children's Services, you can ask them to do a education, health and care needs assessment. This is a process of gathering information together, which takes about 20 weeks. So it's not a sort of insignificant process. It's one that takes a bit of time, but at the end of it, you will have a pack of advice and information that tells you about your child. Now, the local authority can refuse under some circumstances, and we'll come to that in a moment. Whoops. I was going to come to one that says what you can do, but it's not there. So let me tell you, you have a right to ask the local authority to do this needs assessment. If they refuse, you have a right of going to the tribunal to ask the tribunal, the SEND tribunal, to decide whether you were being reasonable or not. And then there follows a whole series of other rights that you have. So let me stop at that point, and let me say that there are some useful links. This will be sent out to you. This presentation will be sent out to you, hopefully with that missing slide. And there are some links and telephone numbers that might be of some help to you. So I believe that there have been and there will be a number of questions to be asked. I can see now that I look that they're here. So I will I'll let Nikki decide what we're going to do.
Okay, so it's Claudia. Nikki just had a little bit of internet issues, so
right.
It's
Hello,
me.
Claudia. glad you're in the background. Thank you.
Right, so we'll start with the first one, and we have a question from Sarah. Where is the best place to get resources for a child with dyscalculia?
Right, so there will be a number of websites that you can refer to. Um, there's a particular set of books available, which it's a relatively recent thing that people have taken notice of dyscalculia, but there are a significant number of books. Look at the publisher Jessica Kingsley. Do a Google search for dyscalculia, and look and see what is there. There is information on the BDA's website about this, and I think we now have, if I'm not wrong here, we now have a specific group of people who take an interest in dyscalculia. When I was a trustee recently, one of my colleagues was absolutely adamant that we needed to have a professional group who dealt with dyscalculia. So the BDA is going to be a good source of information here. Your SENCO should have access to whatever local resources there are. Sometimes these are based in schools, sometimes they're based in the local authority, and sometimes it's private practice people, but there are plenty of them. So go online, go to the BDA website and read.
Yeah, so just to go back on that, the BDA does have a dyscalculia committee now.
Good.
So
There we go.
yeah, and if you send an email to helpline, to our helpline, we would be able to help with whatever questions you might have. Moving on from there, Jeff, another question from Victoria. What about the situation where the parent notices a difficulty, but the school doesn't consider there to be any special needs?
Right. The answer to that one is very, very simple. You need to document your concerns. You need to make it clear to the school that you are recording the comments that they make, and you need to keep asking them why it is that they see something different to what you see. That's the bottom line. If you continue to believe that there is a difficulty and the school is not taking it seriously, then you should be asking the local authority to step in. And the easiest way of doing that is to make a formal request for a needs assessment. And it's the level at which the authority should be undertaking an assessment is actually quite low. The law says if the child might have a special educational need. So they don't actually have to have much evidence for it. It's just there's a question being asked and you are able to ask that question. So I would say you keep asking. If you remember earlier on, I said that if you don't get anywhere with the class teacher, you go to the SENCO. If you don't get anywhere with the SENCO, you go to the head. If you don't get anywhere with the head, you could always try the SEN governor, the special needs governor, which every school has to have. But still, at the end of that process, you would be entitled to ask the local authority to step in. What I think you must do all the way through this is document exactly what your concerns are, what you tried to do, whether the school tries to do anything or not, what you've tried to do, and how this has affected your child. Document it, build up a body of evidence that says there is a problem here. Get on and do that. Can I just jump back to Sarah Macaulay's question?
Yeah.
Okay, as far as adults are concerned, adults can get a diagnosis. It's not as easy to get a diagnosis without paying money. It is a significant problem. But if you are a student on any course at further education level, and sometimes on courses such as apprenticeships and such like, the provider should be able to refer you to get a diagnosis, and they should pay, or they should be able to find funding that will cover the cost of the diagnosis. So adults can get a diagnosis. In the main, though, adults have to get the diagnosis themselves. And again, your local dyslexia association will know who the local assessors are. And there are two groups of assessors, which I should perhaps now put back into this thing. There are psychologists and there are specialist teachers or tutors. And they are different in their origin, but very, very similar in the training that they've had and the rigor with which they will do assessments and provide reports. So it costs you more for a psychologist than it does for a specialist teacher or tutor, but the difference is actually not as much as it used to be.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. We have a question or a couple of questions from Alison. She says, my 7-year-old daughter is displaying many signs of being dyslexic, really struggling with spellings and reading. I'm being told by various people linked to her school not to get her tested until she's 8. This is another 10 months away. Is this correct?
Right. The answer to the question is yes and no, mostly no. So as I've said right from the beginning of this, if you have a concern, start asking questions. If you have a concern, start writing down what you have noticed. Start writing down what you have done. It's never too early. As I said, I hope I said really early on, these things become quite apparent from birth. You actually start seeing things from birth. You may not recognize what they are until you look back later, but actually the signs are there. So if you have something that you believe tells you that your child or the young person has some difficulties, get on with asking the questions. The age issue is a problem. The problem is that all the time we are looking at things which can be difficult for an ordinary child or young person who is developing normally. And it's not until everybody else has actually established themselves that you can see clearly that this person is different to the rest. So if you have some evidence that says this young person, this child is struggling, get on and start looking and documenting the problem. The 8-year-old issue it's a myth. It is a myth. It's not easy to identify things in very young children, but the signs are there. And with expertise, psychologists, specialist teachers, in fact, ordinary teachers and parents will notice. So please don't be put off by that. Keep on making a record of what you've seen and what you ask.
Okay, the second question, or the second part of Alison's question is, I've read in several places that a child should only be diagnosed with dyslexia if persistent interventions do not improve their learning. But this seems to imply to me that they think dyslexics cannot learn, which cannot be the case, surely.
Right. I'm not sure that that final conclusion is a realistic one. Yes, it is true that people who have dyslexia, and I think we're going to be really careful here. Dyslexia is used as a bucket term so that it covers a lot of difficulties which are not truly dyslexia. Dyslexia is a difficulty with literacy. That is what dyslexia is. There are other conditions which are often associated with dyslexia, mixed up with dyslexia, confused with dyslexia, which are not dyslexia, but affect other specific difficulties. So, we use the term specific learning difficulties, and it's not interchangeable with dyslexia. It is actually a global term that brings together all these different difficulties. So going back to the question, this thing about the persistence is part of the graduated response. In the graduated response, in terms of good practice, if a child has a difficulty, you notice the difficulty, you take some very low level action to try and help with it, and then you move on to more complicated, more systematic, more intense activities to try to help the child. So local authorities, and they're not legally correct on this, will usually say to a school, please don't come and request that we do a needs assessment until you've done something that shows that this is not working with normal methods. And I think the word normal methods is the bit that's missed out on this. There's no need to go through multiple cycles. In law, if there is a possibility that a child has a special educational need, then the local authority has to do something about it. The responsibility is, unfortunately, not the schools per se, it's the local authorities. But, it is not true that you can only do it after multiple cycles of doing things. In reality, the graduated approach requires that you try a few things, try a few more things, try a few more things, and keep on ramping up the intensity of what you do. That is good practice. It's not a legal requirement. If you have a child who you suddenly realize has one of these difficulties and it is significantly affecting them, you actually can go straight into a needs assessment. There is no need to go through a whole host of steps. But good practice says you should have been trying all these things anyway. So if the question is, if the situation is that the school is saying, but we haven't done all these things, well, maybe the question you should ask the school is, why didn't you do that?
Perfect. Thank you, Jeff. Another question from Melissa. My son's school has just told me that my son has a special educational need, and after trying to get more clarification, I was told it was a general learning difficulty. Can I ask for them to do further assessments in order for them to find a specific barrier to his needs?
Right. Now, that is a very nice question, that one. Thank you very much, Melissa. As a psychologist and a teacher, this terminology is something which I've grown up with. And the reason that I use the term specific learning difficulty is to differentiate between the child who has a difficulty in all areas of functioning and a child that has a difficulty in a very specific area. Like, for example, the child that can't spell, but can actually perform plays and can argue in debates and do all sorts of wonderful things, very creative, but actually the spelling is what is the problem. So you're absolutely right, Melissa, to talk about specific barriers. In fact, one might actually say that we'd be better talking about barriers than talking about needs, and then looking for ways of getting past the barriers. So a general learning difficulty is usually taken to mean that the child is not functioning at the average level for kids of the same age. So a general learning difficulty will be a child, in an example of that would be a child who is struggling with everything that their peers are actually getting on with. So I would be worried to be told that your child has a general learning difficulty if they have not actually done some testing or some other investigation that actually identifies quite where they are functioning. And I think, there are many, many ways of doing this kind of assessment. You don't have to do IQ tests. There are other ways of finding out, but something should have been done. And you are quite right to get more clarification. And if it's a general learning difficulty, you still need them to find out what on earth it is that they can do and what they can't do. And once you know that, then you should be trying to make sure that whatever learning tasks they have are tailored to their abilities and their potential. Now, that is not to say don't keep trying for the moon. Go as high as you possibly can, but actually be realistic and say, what is going on. I doubt if they are right that there would be a specific barrier. It would be a general set of barriers. But unless you actually know the answer, unless they've done some assessment work, how on earth can you know?
Great, thank you, Jeff. Another question from Sarah. What do you think is the most important thing to work on for a child who's due to move to secondary in September and is high functioning with a recent diagnosis of dyslexia, issues mainly in maths and grammar, not reading?
Right. Whew. Well, given that we are on the verge of July, and therefore the term is going to end in 4 weeks, perhaps at the most, I think school-based things are going to be fairly limited. What I think you ought to do is talk about what you know and what your concerns are, but this time not to the school that he's in at the moment, but the school he's going to go to. I mean, this should have been happening already, and the conversation should have been a three-way conversation. But I would go and talk to the new school now and put on the table in front of them everything you know, and then work out what you can do, really not just now, but come September. Now, in terms of the difficulties you've identified, there are numerous tuition systems and tutors available. I would be cautious about putting too much pressure on your child at this moment in time, but you could use the summer holidays as a time to do things to help. Now, you said not spelling, etc., but it was grammar, which I think is an interesting question as to exactly what the difficulties are. I would suggest that you really should at this point be thinking in terms of getting an assessment done by a specialist teacher, tutor or psychologist to actually identify what these difficulties are, because that's a fairly unusual profile. And you need somebody who actually knows a bit about difficulties in maths, dyscalculia, which is not the most obvious of things to assess for.
Perfect. I think we will have time for just one more question. This question is from Susan. My son is 19 and just completed his first year at university. Talking to him recently, he thinks he has dyslexia and possible be autistic. How can I get the diagnosis so he can get help? Myself, I'm his mum, is dyslexic, and I know what a struggle it can be. What can he be tested, or where can he be tested?
Right, so the straightforward answer to this one is it's unlikely that the school he's been attending will pick this up. I think that's the first thing. At 19, I presume that he's come to the end of a sixth form course and is headed into higher education. The good news is that those students who have specific learning difficulties, dyslexia, autism, etc., are very well provided for in most universities. There is funding available. And once you have a diagnostic report, that funding is relatively easily accessed. It's called the Disabled Students Allowance, and it is administered by the student loan company. And it pays for specialist teachers and tutors to help students. So if the young person is autistic, then I think you need to make sure that the university and the specialist tutors that they put in place are very, very aware of the needs, the different needs of autistic people. And again, I'll come back to this. You need a diagnostic assessment. More than just saying he's autistic, it's got to talk about the characteristics of the autism, because every person who's autistic is very different. The range of special needs, specific learning difficulties is massive. But when you're looking at people with autism, they are so individual that you really do need to get under the skin of what's going on. So you probably would be best, if you haven't already got an assessment done, to actually invest in getting assessment done. And again, if you go through the BDA does assessments and has contacts with people who do assessments, and there's people like myself and my teacher tutor colleagues who will do that kind of assessment with you. But the follow on to it is very important. The follow on is you go to the university, to student services, and you say, look, we've got this report that says he's autistic. We've got this report that talks about his special needs, and we want some proper advice and we want some proper support.
Oh, perfect, Jeff. Thank you so much. The questions are coming in, so we could be here all night, really, if we don't put a stop to this. We got some really interesting questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer all of them.
I'm going to jump in on anonymous attendee.
Okay. Okay, I thought you might.
Number one, self-esteem is a major problem for everyone who has any kind of special need. It's a massive problem. You need to be honest about them having a difficulty, but you also need to be honest about the possibility that there are ways of overcoming the barriers. There are ways of functioning, and there are things you can do which may not be quite as high-flying as you thought you might be wanting to do, but which are perfectly respectable, perfectly helpful, and financially very viable in terms of careers. So this young lady that's talked about here, who is a clever girl but has these barriers, tell her not to give up. She must not give up. She must keep trying. What you need is that person in the education system who knows about her, who believes in her, and will work with her. So a mentor, a coach is probably the right kind of person to get.
Thank you, Jeff. I thought you'd do that. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you sneaked that one in there. Thank you so much. It was a really informative session. That's really great. Like I said, we're having so many interesting questions come in. We're also getting a lot of thank yous and how incredible helpful your session was. So thank you so much once again, Jeff.
Send me the questions via you or directly, please.
Yeah. Anyone that would like to send questions, you're more than welcome to send them to our conference at BDA email address, and we can forward them on to Jeff. So that's great. For everybody that's listening, it's just a reminder to keep an eye out on our website and social media, so we can continue to provide help and support. So it just leaves me to say a really big thank you to Jeff once again for joining us. Thank you, Jeff. We hope you all have a lovely evening, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.
Bye.